So here's the trout survey data I have from Sauk County, Wisconsin. This data was collected between 2014 and 2019, so it's a little older, so it may be a little different, but it's probably similar. But it's interesting to me because I'm a scientist, but I also like fishing, so I find this data to be really interesting. So the first creek I have data from is Bear Creek. Bear Creek has some brook trout and some brown trout. Each stretch has different amounts of brook and brown trout. The farther upstream stretches have more brook trout and the further downstream stretches have more brown trout. It has all right size, but not massive. They did collect some 15 plus inch fish, but not a lot of them. And they did, in the spot B, they caught quite a few brook trout too, which was more brook trout than I'd expected they'd catch from this creek. I have fished this creek a few times. I think I've caught a few brook trout and some brown trout. It's a decent creek and there's a lot of area where they've redone the creek and made it deeper and put in rock structure which will hold fish in that certain area. Here's continued surveys of Bear Creek. Again, they caught quite a good number of brown trout, like between 400 and 800 per mile. And a couple of the ones had quite a few good sized 12 plus inch fish per mile too. If you compare them to other surveys, that's pretty good. And I've done decent fishing on Bear Creek. This is Biser Creek. I've never fished this. I'm not sure whether this flows into Dell Creek or Bear Creek, but it's just a little tributary stream. It's small and it only has brook trout in it. Camels Creek is another little creek. I think this does flow into Dell Creek. They caught some brook trout out of it. Nothing large, but it definitely holds some brook trout. I've never fished it. Croal Creek flows into Bear Creek, and they caught some brown trout in Croal Creek. I also haven't fished this little creek also. You're probably better off fishing the larger creek and not fishing the smaller creek. Dell Creek flows into the Wisconsin River by Wisconsin Dells. I haven't fished it before. There's brown brook and rainbow trout in it. There wasn't as high of numbers of fish per mile as there are in Bear Creek or some of the other better driftless streams, but there's definitely some trout in it. They did catch some pretty big fish in these surveys though out of it. They caught one as big as brown as big as 21.7 inches. They caught some 10 plus inch brookies out of it too, so there must be some fish that get decent sized in Dell Creek. And rainbow must be either stocked into Dell Creek or get in there from somewhere else. Harrison Creek, I'm not sure where that creek is, but it has some brook trout in it. I've never fished that creek either. Honey Creek I have fished a few times before. There's a lot of brown trout in it. It's pretty narrow but deep, and there's areas where they redid the habitat and made the creek deeper and put rocks in it to create run riffles areas. And it has a high number of brown trout in it. And there's a fair number of 12 inch plus fish too, and some 16 inch plus fish. I did catch some 15 to 16 inch fish out of there when I fished it, but I caught a lot of like 6 to 12 inch browns also. It's a good creek, but the only issue with it is it grows over really bad with reed canary grass, and by the middle of summer, it's basically unfishable. You're literally casting between a foot of reed canary grass. So it is next to impossible to fish when they're in the middle of summer. And there's quite a bit of eased land which you can fish on for trout. Here's some more surveys for Honey Creek. It basically says the same thing. There's a lot of brown trout. in it. They've been surveying the creek a lot, so that's why. Hulbert Creek is by Wisconsin Dells. It has some brown and some brook trout in it. I don't know how good it is for fishing because I've never fished it before, but it definitely has some trout in it, but not super high numbers. Another stream is the Little Baraboo River. This flows into the Baraboo River. It has brook trout in it, and it has quite a few brook trout in a couple of the surveys. The size is not very large, but it's definitely worth trying. You never know until you try it. So Manley Creek I have fished before. It is a little tiny creek by Devil's Lake State Park. It's really tough to fish too. It's very narrow, but it's deep, and it's pretty much entirely grown over by grass. And basically the only way you could fish it was to drop a worm underneath the grass or drop a fly on the surface. But it has a lot of brook trout in it, and there's some good size, decent sized brook trout too, which are 10-inch plus ones. And I fished it and caught some brook trout, but it was also challenging to fish. This video is going to be short. Marble Creek, I'm not sure what stream this is a tributary to, but Marble Creek is another little creek in Sauk County. It has some brook trout in it. There could be some browns in it too, but I'm not sure. McCarville Creek is another little tiny feeder creek into a larger creek. I think it flows into Dell Creek, but I could be wrong. But it has some brook trout in it. Mortimer Valley Creek is another little tributary stream. I really don't know what creek that flows into, but it has some brook trout in it. North Branch Honey Creek flows into Honey Creek. It has brown trout in it. I've driven over it, but I've never fished on it. I don't even know if there's any public access to it. But it looks like there's some brown trout that live in it. Otter Creek is a tiny creek north of Prairie to Sac. As you head up into the Baraboo Bluffs, it's to the west of Highway 12. And there's a pretty cool looking chunk of public land which you drive up into. It has a lot of chubs in it. I fished it once, and I caught a couple, like 3 or 4 brook trout, but it was really overrun with chubs. So it'd be a better spot to fish for catfish, fish for chubs than would be to fish for trout, in my own opinion. And I think the brookies I caught were pretty small too. In this survey, they didn't catch that many fish either. Parfreys Glen I have fished before. There's not that many fish in it by where you hike up to the waterfall and so forth. I know the one day I tried fishing it like 3 years ago, and I don't think I caught any trout out of it, but I previously have caught some little brookies out of it. But the survey where they caught more of the brookies was down closer to where it flows into where Manley Creek flows into it, which is in the lower part of the creek, which I have not fished. But there's definitely brook trout in it. And it's a fun place to go hiking at. It's really pretty. Rowley Creek is another creek. It starts in Columbia County and flows into Sauk County. I fished it like 2 or 3 times. I've caught both brook and brown trout in it. There's a decent amount of brook trout and quite a few brown trout in it. There's really not a lot for public land on it though, so be careful where you access it from. But I think I caught like a 17 or 18-inch fish out of it one day too. Sealy Creek, I have also fished. That creek had a lot of chubs in it too. And in these surveys, it sounds like there's a few browns, but not a lot of browns in it. and no brook trout. Out of curiosity, I did try fishing this creek one day. I don't think there's much for public land on it though to access it. Shannahan Valley Creek flows into Honey Creek. It, I've never fished it. It has brown trout in it. Not a lot of them, and they're pretty small, but I'm assuming it's a pretty small creek. Wilson Creek, I'm not sure where that's even at. It has brook trout in it, and I have never fished it before. And there's some brookies in it though, so you never know until you try it. Willow Creek, this is the way upper part of Willow Creek. If I get around to making a video on surveys from Richland County, there'll be a lot of data on Willow Creek, but that video also will take a really long time to make because there's a lot of streams in Richland County. So I think that'll be it for this video. And this is my Sauk County trout stream information, and I'm not rambling as bad as I was in the Columbia County one. But if you like this, comment. If you don't like it, give it a dislike. I'm sorry if I'm sharing any of your spots. I really don't care. But some people might find this information interesting.